Now, the Conservatives and Labour have clear differences in their policies on how we should trade after Brexit, with Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, saying we should have a customs union with the EU, compared to Theresa May, who says we shouldn't. But what does all this mean for consumers? Well, Emma Vardy's been looking at how Brexit could affect our shopping bills.
The way we change our relationship with the EU in future could affect us all here on the High Street. The Conservatives and Labour have two distinct visions of the type of Brexit they want, and prices could go up or down depending on the type of Brexit that we get.
Both Conservatives and Labour want to have free trade with the EU after Brexit, but the Conservatives want to leave the customs union and the single market.
Think of the EU single market and customs union like a great big high street where we can buy and sell stuff from EU countries at no extra cost.
At the moment, goods are traded between EU countries free of charge. Jeremy Corbyn says we should stay in a customs union with the EU, with the aim of keeping prices on our shopping pretty much the same. But at the moment, if we want goods imported from outside the EU, then they are charged and we have to pay extra tariffs. Theresa May says we're going to leave the European single market and the customs union so that we're less constrained by EU trade rules, and so that we would be free to strike our own trade deals with other countries.
The economists who are enthusiastic about Brexit think that we can make big savings by cutting tariffs on goods that currently we have high tariff levels, like textiles and clothing, for example. Most economists point to the fact that there aren't actually all that many goods where there are high tariffs on imports from the rest of the world, and most economists think that having a bit more friction on half of our trade, which comes from the EU, is going to be much more costly than the benefits that we'd get from cutting tariffs on the rest of the world.
There's no perfect way of forecasting what will happen in any Brexit scenario. Take dairy, for example. Around a quarter of all our dairy products are imported from the EU. If we leave the customs union, the price could go up. But imports from the rest of the world, like butter from New Zealand, could become cheaper. Likewise, our meat from the EU could become a bit more expensive. But we could benefit from cheaper imports from the rest of the world.
But experts don't always agree when it comes to how much prices may change. And you may well hear some politicians saying completely the opposite from one another when it comes to how us consumers may be affected. And that's because prices could change by a greater or lesser degree depending on how the logistical challenges of leaving the EU play out.
Some of the effects of leaving the customs union are fairly easy and direct to predict. If we cut tariffs on textiles and clothing, then we can work out how much textiles and clothing we buy from the rest of the world, what the price reductions will be. On other aspects, it's harder to make estimates. We know that there will be increased friction on trade with the EU, but it's harder to put a definite number on how big these frictions will be.
With clothing, a lot of it's imported from non-EU countries where tariffs are high, so it could become cheaper after Brexit. But contrast that with things like cosmetics and soaps. We buy a lot of this from the EU and it's heavily regulated, so leaving the customs union could mean cosmetics get more expensive.
But don't forget, shopping for goods is only one part of what we spend our money on. Leaving the customs union and single market could also affect things like package holidays, airfares and services like banking. But predicting that is much harder until we know what sort of Brexit we end up with.